Hello and welcome back for another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 11.14. This is it, folks. This is the final top 10 of set 5 before we move into the mid set. We'll be saying goodbye to several champions, but which ones will make it into our final top 10? There's only one way to find out, so keep on watching to see. Let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our top 10, we have Gragas coming in as the number 10 champion. Dawnbringers. That's the name of today's top 10 because we have quite a few of them on the list. Gragas is the foundation for a lot of early game boards, especially if you're planning to transition into the late game. Why? Because he's extremely hard to kill. Dawnbringer and Brawler just work so well together as synergies, plus his ability naturally increases his survivability since it gives him damage reduction. And then there's the items that you can give Gragas. Ormogs is by far the most common and best, as the health increase will help keep him alive quite a while since it directly boosts the value of Dawnbringer. Bramble can prevent critical hits from bursting him down, Dragon's Claw will reduce the damage taken from magic, and then there's generally good defensive items like Shadow Locket. Shadow Stoneblade is also valuable on Gragas since it allows you to play him as a solo frontliner. The best part of all of those items is that they transfer over to other frontliners later on in the game. Garen is the obvious choice since he's Dawnbringer, but any late game frontliner can use the items that you give to Gragas. This makes him one of the more flexible early game champions, which is great to have in a meta and set that doesn't often favor flexibility. Put all that together and you've got one of the best one-cost champions for the early stages of the game. And he even scales well towards the late game, at least until you find more suitable late game frontliners. Up next, we have Yasuo as the number 9 champion. Poor old Yasuo was nerfed again in patch 11.14. Despite the continued nerfs he's received, Yasuo is still a viable carry in the current meta. The reason for this is simple: true damage. Since Yasuo does true damage, it will always make him a viable champion, particularly since he's a 3 cost, as that means 3-starring him for scaling is always a viable option. Vayne also does true damage, and we do see her sometimes, but Vayne doesn't scale nearly as well as Yasuo. Partially due to her synergies, but also because Yasuo is a 3 cost and has better overall stats because of it. So a Yasuo 3 will always be more valuable than a Vayne 3, at least in the context of their damage output with true damage. Despite still being relevant, Yasuo has taken a hit to his viability after all of the nerfs. He's not a guaranteed win streak champion anymore unless you can 2-star him relatively early, meaning in stage 3, and have good items ready to go for him. The best way to utilize Yasuo is to stabilize in stage 4 with him, Dragon Slayer, and Nightbringer. From there, you can either reroll for Yasuo 3 or try to pivot into a different composition at level 8 during stage 5. Sadly, this may be the last time Yasuo is relevant for a while, as the mid-set is removing Dragon Slayer. Dragon Slayer with Yasuo has been a big part in helping Yasuo scale into the late game, and without that trait, he may not be viable anymore past stage 3. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out, but for those of you playing 11.14, Yasuo is still viable. Moving along, we have Nidalee coming in at number 8. Back to Dawnbringers. Nidalee has become a staple mid-game carry for a lot of compositions because she can hold onto a multitude of items. Again, the most likely transition will be into a full Dawnbringer comp, but you can give her AD items for Aphelios, Draven, or Jax. Those pivots may not be quite as strong as going into Dawnbringer, but at least you have options when playing Nidalee. The main reason that Nidalee is suddenly on everyone's radar is due to the mini rework that she received. She's now got a high amount of evasion while dishing out good damage on top of her traits that boost her survivability and damage. Dodge is a big one because there's less bursty magic damage during stage 3 and 4, meaning to kill her, most champions have to auto-attack, and dodge is the best counter against it. If there was another patch before the mid-set, Nidalee may have risen on our list. But since she's new to the scene, we're only putting her at number 8. But don't let that relatively high placement deter you from using her in your games, because she's by far one of the best item holders during stage 3 and 4. On to our number 7 champion, Kindred. First off, we have to say that we're sad to see Kindred leaving the champion pool in the mid-set. Kindred has provided great amounts of late-game utility that 5-cost champion pool lacks. They're also one of the main reasons that Ranger has had any relevance in the meta, though we can't make any judgments on how that will turn out in the mid-set. Still, Kindred leaving means less utility for late-game boards, and that's always unfortunate. But that's also what makes Kindred so good in 11.14. Without a doubt, Kindred is the best Mystic currently. They can be played as a solo champion on any board regardless of composition, even if you don't need Mystic. Of course, more commonly, you will have Kindred with a Mystic, especially since the meta favors magic damage comps. Overall, Kindred has been a solid addition to the game for set 5, and their removal is likely going to be one of the most notable champions leaving in the mid-set. Up next, we have Nunu coming in at number 6. Nunu has several things going for him in the current meta. He's a brawler, making him naturally survive longer thanks to increased health. That health also directly buffs his ability, which deals true damage when his health is higher than his target's. This leads to him being one of the better Stage 3 champions in terms of dishing out damage, because few champions that early in the game can survive against high amounts of true damage. And of course, Nunu is an Abomination. Abomination is doing quite well in the current meta. Find Nunu early enough and you can run Abomination all the way from Stage 2 until the end of the game. Of course, once you get into the late game, both Abomination and Nunu won't scale as well, though having an Abomination emblem for 5 of the trait does change that. Prior to the late game, though, Nunu is one of the best frontline champions in the game for both taking damage and dealing it. We've got two familiar faces taking the number 5 spot together, Ivern and Volibear. Once again, we see these two champions paired together. Ivern may be able to stand out in his zone since we often see him played without Volibear, but Volibear definitely needs Ivern to succeed. Putting them together increases both their survivability and thus value as frontliners. Ivern also brings Renewer and Invoker to the table, meaning you have flexibility to fit in late game champions like Heimerdinger, Tima, or Karma. That is the crux of the reason as to why Ivern and Volibear consistently make it into our top 10 together: flexibility. With just 2 champions, you get hard to kill frontliners that bring decent amounts of CC. This makes them perfect for a whole bunch of compositions, most notably Dawnbringer. The downside is that Volibear is a 5-cost champion, and his relative strength compared to the other 5 costs is not all that great. Yes, Revenant will increase his value, but it's night and day if you compare Volibear to, say, Garen or Kindred. This means if you want to maximize the value of Volibear, you need Ivern and vice versa. That said, the likelihood of finding both champions is pretty high, so you're almost never in a position where you can't find one without the other. Speaking of frontliners, up next we have Rell coming in at number 4. Good old reliable Rell finds herself once again in our top 10. Unfortunately for Rell, Redeemed has taken a bit of a tumble in terms of priority, so we're not seeing her quite as often as in the previous meta. She's still a staple champion of the meta, but Redeemed is definitely where she shines the brightest. Of course, Redeemed is still viable, but not as common of a vertical trait as Dawnbringer is. With all that said, Rell is still one of the best standalone champions in the game. You can toss her into any comp, and as long as she's level 2, she'll provide value as a frontliner both in tanking damage, but also providing CC and shields to your team. So even with Redeem not being quite as good as it once was, Rell is still at the top of the frontline meta. Let's move into our top 3, starting with Heimerdinger as the number 3 champ. Once you hit the late game, assuming you have AP items, the best possible pivot is going to be Heimerdinger. Doesn't matter what build you were playing prior to that, Heimerdinger is easily the best transition that you can make with those items. There's 3 simple reasons as to why. IVH. Ivern, Volibear, and Heimerdinger. Put those 3 onto your board in the late game and you're good to go. Okay, that's a very simplified version of it, but not far off, as playing Heimerdinger with Ivern and Volibear is a surefire way to set yourself up for a strong late game board. From there, you can play anything alongside of them. What's most important, and also the most difficult part, is 2-starring Heimerdinger. Once you have that and items for him, you're likely at least a top 3. It's worth noting that this isn't an easy pivot to make because a 1-star Heimer will be outscaled. But again, if you can 2-star him, then you're in a great position late game. Be sure to keep Heimerdinger in mind when playing any AP mid-game comp. Coming in at number 2 is Garen. More Dawnbringers. But Garen goes beyond just being a Dawnbringer because what he brings to the table is more than just his trait. He brings Magic Resist Shred, which helps so many compositions in the current meta. On top of that, he's inherently hard to kill because he gains a massive shield from his ability. Plus, he's a Dawnbringer, which is honestly the main reason why we see him so often in the current meta. There's not too much else to talk about for Garen. If you're playing an AP comp, you definitely want him on your board, as even a level 1 Garen will provide a lot of value. And the number 1 champion for patch 11.14 and set 5 before the mid-set is Karma. Let's be honest, this isn't a surprise to anyone. Karma is the face of Dawnbringer, and Dawnbringer is likely the best composition in the current meta. You may not always win with Dawnbringer, but hitting Karma 2 with a Garen essentially ensures you a top 4. There's multiple reasons for this. 1, her items are flexible ever since they reworked her to not rely on blue buff. This lets you play extra damage item or utility or even something defensive. Speaking of defense, she's one of the hardest to kill backline carries because of, yep, you guessed it, Dawnbringer. And the most obvious reason is she does a ton of damage. While Karma won't always win you rounds, she's by far the most consistent carry in the current meta. Just be careful and scout often if you do end up wanting to play Karma, because chances are multiple players will be contesting it. Alright, that's it for our top 10 champions for the last patch of set 5 before the mid set. Before we go, we have a few honorable mentions to talk about. First up is Vel'Koz. We mentioned Redeem not doing quite as well in the current meta, and one of those reasons is the inconsistency of Vel'Koz. At times, Vel'Koz will laser down the enemy team without any issue. Other times, and this has a lot to do with positioning, he'll be stuck killing the wrong champions. Because Vel'Koz is so fickle with items and positioning, he struggles to do well as a consistent carry. He is viable, but you have to be on top of your scouting and positioning to do well with him. Draven is next, and honestly, he's the best AD carry in the meta. The main issue is you need to 2-star him relatively quickly, otherwise Forgotten will get outscaled too quickly. But he's the most consistent AD carry, so if you have AD items, try to play Draven if possible. And lastly, there's Aphelios. Rangers are all over the place. Sometimes they are really good, and other times they fall flat and slide into the bottom 4. A lot of that has to do with their reliance on hitting Aphelios 2, Kindred, and Darius. Without those pieces, the composition tends to not do all that well. But if you can safely get to level 8, meet all the champion requirements, and have items for Aphelios, Rangers are a great comp to play. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. Not much has changed in the meta for the last few patches, so this list should feel quite familiar. Unfortunately, we're saying goodbye to Kindred as well as a few of the other champions that we've seen make it into previous top 10s. Let us know in the comment section below what champions you will miss that are being removed from the mid set. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.